The silence up here, it isn't empty. It's heavy. It has a weight to it, like a wet wool blanket pressed against your face until you can remember what it feels like to breathe easy. I've been in this timber tower for 3 weeks. 50 miles of jagged rock and ancient rotting pines separate me from the nearest human soul. Out here, the wind doesn't just blow, it mourns. The air inside the cabin is thick with the scent of wood smoke and my own sour sweat. It's a stagnant human smell that clings to the walls. I try to mask it by cracking the window, but the mountain air is worse. It smells of damp pine needle rot and something else. Something like wet fur left to sit in a cellar for a decade. It's a cloying, organic stench that makes the back of my throat itch. I'm cold. Not the kind of cold you can shake off with a sweater. This is a bone-deep, marrow-drilling chill. The freezing rain has been turning to ice the moment it hits the glass, sealing me inside this wooden box. Every time the wind gusts, the entire structure groans. It's the sound of old, stressed timber, a slow, rhythmic creak that sounds too much like a giant rib cage expanding and contracting. I was sitting at the small, scarred desk, trying to warm my hands over a mug of coffee that had already gone tepid. The heat was leaving everything. My fingers felt like stiff, frozen sausages, clumsy and numb. The radio on the shelf had been dead for 4 days. The winter storm had seen to that. It was just a hunk of plastic and silent copper. Then, the static started. It wasn't the sharp, electric hiss you'd expect. It was soft, wet. It sounded like someone dragging a heavy, waterlogged carpet across a floor. Slap, drag, slap. I stared at the radio. The power light was dark, but then a voice came through the speaker. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was mine.
I am reaching for the mug.
I froze. My hand was inches from the ceramic. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. 3 seconds later, my hand, acting on a reflex I couldn't control, closed around the handle. The voice on the radio was perfectly calm. It had the same low, tired rasp I hear in my own head. It was me, but it was happening before I did it. I pulled my hand back, knocking the mug over. The cold coffee spilled across the desk, soaking into the logs. I could smell the bitter, watery dregs mixing with the scent of the damp wood.
I am standing up now.
I clamped my jaw shut. I sat perfectly still. I forced my muscles to lock. My heart was thumping against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that felt like a trapped bird. 1, 2, 3. My legs pushed me up. I stood. I didn't want to. I was screaming inside my own mind, telling my nerves to stop, to sit back down, to do anything else. But I stood. I looked out the window. The world was a blur of gray and white. The freezing rain was coming down harder now, sharp, icy needles that hissed as they struck the glass. Down below, at the base of the tower, I heard it. slap. A heavy, wet sound, like a carcass being dropped into deep mud. Slap, drag, slap. Something was at the bottom of the ladder. The smell began to change. The wood smoke was gone. Now the cabin filled with the overwhelming odor of a slaughterhouse floor. It was the smell of open cavities and old blood, mixed with the sharp, biting sting of the freezing rain.
I am walking to the window to see what is below me.
No, I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like dry leaves skittering over pavement. 1, 2, 3. My boots moved across the floorboards. The wood groaned under my weight. Creak, creak, creak. I reached the glass. I leaned my forehead against the pane. The cold from the glass was so intense it felt like it was burning my skin, a searing, electric heat that made my eyes water. I looked down. There was a shape in the mud. It was large. It looked like a man, but the proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long, bending at angles that would have snapped human bone. It was covered in matted, dark fur that was slick with freezing rain. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, pale surface where a mouth and eyes should be. It was holding a handheld radio. The figure stopped. It didn't look up. It didn't have eyes to look up with, but it tilted its head, as if listening to the rhythm of my heart through the floorboards.
I am going to unlock the door.
I felt my right hand move toward the heavy iron bolt. The metal was covered in a thin layer of frost. When my fingers touched it, the skin stuck to the ice. I felt the sharp, stinging tear as I forced my hand to slide, pulling the bolt back. The sound of the lock sliding home was deafening in the small room. Clack. I began to weep. The tears were warm on my cheeks for a second before the mountain chill turned them into icy tracks. I could smell the salt of my own terror.
I am opening the door to let it in.
Please, I sobbed. Stop. Please stop. The stairs outside began to groan, one by one. Creak, creak, creak. The wet slap of those heavy, fur-covered feet was getting closer. The smell was so thick now I could almost taste it. It tasted like copper. It tasted like the end. I watched my hand reach for the latch. My fingers were white. The knuckles were protruding like stones. 1, 2, 3. I lifted the latch. The wind roared into the cabin, a violent, freezing force that knocked the maps off the walls and sent the smell of the forest screaming into the room. The door swung wide. The thing was standing there. It was taller than the doorway, hunched over, its long, spindly arms hanging down to its knees. It didn't have a mouth, but I could hear it breathing. It was a wet, rattling sound, like a man drowning in his own lungs. It stepped inside.
The floorboards didn't just creak, they screamed under its impossible weight. It reached out a long, wet hand. The fur was cold, so cold. When it touched my neck, it felt like a collar of ice. The radio on the desk crackled one last time.
I am finally home.
The wind died down. The freezing rain stopped. There was only the sound of the timber tower groaning in the dark. And then there was nothing. The Whispering Ridge doesn't leave witnesses. It only leaves echoes.